"Here, we don't serve black people. Get out!" The night manager's words sliced through the polished elegance of the Fairline's marble lobby, halting the soft jazz and dimming the brass railings' gleam. A black woman, the CEO of the hospitality empire that owns 51% of this very hotel, steps forward, her hoodie and jeans defying the expectations of the staff. Mocked, dismissed, and scrutinized as a trespasser, she faces cold indifference, skeptical sneers, and a security guard's looming presence. Yet her calm resolve hints at a reckoning. What happens when the person you humiliate holds the keys to your world? Subscribe now to catch our latest stories that challenge and inspire, and drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? Stay until the end to uncover the truth behind her silence and why it speaks louder than their prejudice. The Fairline Hotel in Charleston stood like a monument to elegance, its glass facade catching the last glimmers of twilight. Marble floors gleamed under warm chandeliers, and the soft hum of jazz wove through the air, a curated promise of luxury. Melissa Nkosi, the black CEO of Rowan Hospitality Group, stepped out of the evening's damp embrace, her gray hoodie zipped to her chest, jeans loose, and sneakers silent on the wet pavement. She owned 51% of this hotel, a silent titan in her empire. Yet tonight she arrived unannounced, a deliberate test to see how her staff treated a stranger who didn't scream wealth or status. Her eyes, sharp with purpose, scanned the towering structure. This was her stage, but the actors didn't know their lines. Inside, the lobby unfolded as she'd envisioned on blueprints years ago, velvet chairs in precise rows, brushed brass railings catching the firelight, and a grand front desk anchoring the space. Melissa approached, her steps steady, echoing faintly. Behind the counter stood Dylan, a young clerk in his early 20s, hair slicked with gel, navy blazer straining at the shoulders. His name tag glinted under the soft lights. He glanced up, eyes narrowing as they took in her casual attire. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice clipped, already reaching for his keyboard. "I have a reservation," Melissa said evenly. "Under Nkosi." Dylan's fingers tapped, his frown deepening. "Nothing under Nkosi. You sure?" His tone carried a thin edge of mockery, as if her presence here was a clerical error. He didn't meet her gaze, his attention drifting back to the screen. "Try Rowan Hospitality Group," she said, voice calm but firm. "It's for a suite." His eyes flicked up, skepticism hardening his features. "That's reserved for corporate execs. You got a confirmation number?" The question wasn't curious. It was a challenge, laced with the assumption she didn't belong. Before Melissa could respond, the revolving doors spun, admitting a white couple, Michael and Jennifer, dressed in tailored coats and polished shoes. They glided to the desk, where Dylan's demeanor shifted like a switch flipped. "Welcome to the Fairline," he beamed, fingers flying to retrieve their keys. "Suite 12-4, all set. Enjoy your stay." Within 30 seconds, they were gone, clutching keycards, their laughter trailing toward the elevators. Melissa stood, still waiting, her jaw tightening imperceptibly. She cleared her throat. "It's an internal booking. Suite 1701. There's a note attached." Dylan sighed, a small performative sound, and tapped again. "I don't see anything for you. Sorry." The apology was hollow, his eyes barely lifting from the screen. He leaned back, arms crossing as if her insistence was an inconvenience. Melissa's gaze held steady, but the air around her grew heavier. From the corner of the lobby, near a side counter stacked with cleaning supplies, Loretta, an older black housekeeper, watched in silence. Her hands, rough from years of bleach and labor, gripped a rag, her dark eyes flickering with recognition. She'd seen this before, too many times. The unfairness hung in the room like damp air, but she stayed quiet, her silence a shield born of necessity, of knowing that speaking up could cost more than it gained. The office door swung open, and Linda, the night manager, emerged. Mid-40s, blonde hair swept into a tight bun, her red lipstick stark against her pale skin. She carried a clipboard like a scepter. Her smile was practiced, professional, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Is there an issue here?" she asked, her voice smooth yet edged with condescension. "No issue," Melissa replied, her tone measured. "I'm checking in. Suite under Rowan Hospitality." Linda's eyes swept over Melissa, hoodie, jeans, sneakers, and her smile tightened. "The VIP area is for guests with a corporate confirmation. Do you have any documentation?" The question was a velvet glove over a steel fist, implying Melissa couldn't possibly belong to that tier. "Here, we don't serve—" Linda paused, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Black people. Get out." The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the lobby's polished calm. Melissa didn't flinch. Her face remained composed, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. She reached into her pocket, producing a driver's license and a business card embossed with Melissa Nkosi, CEO, Rowan Hospitality Group. Linda glanced at them, her lips pursing, and handed them back with a dismissive flick. "This doesn't clarify anything," she said. "We've had impersonators before." Tom, the security guard, loomed closer. Mid-50s, ex-cop posture. His hand rested near his belt, not on his radio, but close enough to signal authority. His gaze raked over Melissa, sizing her up as a threat rather than a guest. "Ma'am, step over there," he said, nodding toward the lounge area, his tone cold, final. Melissa didn't move. "I'll stay here," she said, her voice a low blade cutting through their assumptions. Loretta's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice unfolding. The housekeeper turned, grabbing a bottle of sanitizer, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of witnessing another moment where dignity was stripped away. She said nothing, but her presence was a quiet anchor in the storm. The lobby's elegance felt hollow now, its luxury a facade masking the ugliness beneath. Dylan leaned against the counter, smirking faintly, certain he had won. Linda's clipboard tapped rhythmically against her thigh, a metronome of control. Tom stood sentinel, his shadow stretching across the marble. Melissa, however, stood taller, her silence louder than their words. This was her hotel, her legacy, and she would not be erased. What came next would depend on how deep they chose to dig their own graves. The lobby of the Fairline Hotel stood frozen, its polished elegance now a stage for a silent standoff. Melissa Nkosi, unyielding in her gray hoodie and jeans, faced the dismissive trio, Dylan, Linda, and Tom, whose assumptions had already drawn a line she refused to cross. Her silence was not surrender. It was a weapon, sharp and deliberate, letting them dig deeper into their own misjudgments. She would not be erased, but the weight of their prejudice pressed harder, testing the steel of her composure. Melissa reached into her pocket, producing a driver's license and a sleek business card embossed with Melissa Nkosi, CEO, Rowan Hospitality Group. She slid them across the counter, her movements precise, her eyes locked on Linda. The night manager's red lips twitched into a faint smile as she glanced at the documents, barely a second's pause before handing them back with a dismissive flick. "You look different from what I expected a CEO to be," Linda said, her voice smooth but laced with a barb, as if Melissa's presence defied some unspoken rule of power. "Different how?" Melissa's tone was even, a quiet challenge that cut through the jazz humming from hidden speakers. Linda faltered, her clipboard shifting in her grip, her smile faltering under the weight of the question. "We've had issues with impersonators before," she said, sidestepping, her words a flimsy shield. "You understand." Melissa's gaze didn't waver, but the air grew thicker, charged with unspoken truths. Tom, the security guard, edged closer, his ex-cop frame looming, hand still hovering near his belt. His eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned her like a suspect, not a guest. Dylan leaned toward Linda, his whisper just loud enough for Melissa to catch. "She doesn't look like someone who'd book Suite 1701. The words were a verdict, based not on evidence, but on the hoodie, the jeans, the skin that didn't match their vision of privilege. Melissa stepped back, her sneakers silent on the marble, and moved toward the glass doors. The Charleston night greeted her with a cool bite, the damp air clinging to her skin. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as she dialed a number, her voice low but firm in a brief exchange. She hung up, pocketing the device, her breath visible in the evening chill. She wasn't retreating. She was summoning a storm. Back inside, the lobby's artificial calm held, but cracks were forming. From the corner, Loretta, the older black housekeeper, seized the moment to approach the side counter, her hands clutching a rag as if it anchored her. She reached for a bottle of sanitizer, her eyes meeting Melissa's through the glass for a fleeting second. As she passed, she set a glass of water on the counter beside Melissa, her voice a whisper, "Just stand still, ma'am. Let them dig their own hole." The words were soft but heavy, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen this script play out too often, who'd learned to navigate its pain with quiet defiance. Near the velvet partition, Pamela, a young white intern, stood half-hidden, her phone angled discreetly. Her hands trembled as she recorded the exchange, capturing Dylan's smirk and Linda's clipped tone. Her eyes darted nervously, torn between the instinct to document the truth and the fear of what it might cost. If the video surfaced, her internship, her fragile foothold in this world, could vanish. Yet the injustice unfolding before her gnawed at her conscience, urging her to act. A new figure entered the scene. Harold, an older white man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, stepped into the lobby. His beige coat was neatly pressed, his steps slow but deliberate. He paused, taking in the tension, his gaze settling on Melissa. "I was here years ago," he said, his voice low, weathered by time. "They made me feel like I didn't belong either. I stayed quiet. You haven't. I admire that." His words were a bridge, connecting his past to her present, a reminder that this moment was part of a larger, uglier pattern. Melissa nodded faintly, her expression unreadable but her resolve unshaken. The lobby's opulence, the velvet chairs, the flickering fireplace, felt like a mockery now, a polished veneer over a deeper rot. Linda's insistence on corporate confirmation wasn't just protocol. It was a gatekeeping tactic, rooted in the assumption that someone like Melissa, black and casually dressed, couldn't possibly wield the power she claimed. Dylan's whisper about Suite 1701 wasn't just doubt. It was a judgment, dismissing her based on stereotypes that had no place in her hotel. Tom's looming presence wasn't security. It was intimidation, a silent message that she was out of place. The air crackled with tension, the jazz now a faint hum beneath the weight of the moment. Pamela's phone remained steady, though her heart raced. Loretta lingered near her cot, her silence a quiet rebellion. Harold stood watch, his presence a testament to the cost of past silences. Melissa, at the center of it all, felt the pressure mounting but stood firm, her calm a blade honed by years of navigating rooms that tried to shrink her. They thought they were in control, but they were wrong. The call she'd made was a spark, and the fire was coming. The call Melissa Nkosi made was a spark, and the fire was coming. She stood just outside the Fairline's glass doors, her breath fogging in the Charleston night, her gray hoodie a quiet defiance against the polished world within. The lobby's chandeliers cast golden light across the marble, but inside, the air was heavy with prejudice. The staff's assumptions a noose they'd tied themselves. Melissa pocketed her phone, her eyes steady, knowing the spark she'd ignited would soon blaze through their carefully curated control. Across town, in a dimly lit restaurant, William Langston, her senior aide, sat opposite Julian Barrett, the operations director. The clink of wine glasses paused as William's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening at Melissa's name. "It's her," he said, voice low. Julian, lean and sharp in a tailored suit, set his fork down mid-bite. "Trouble?" William nodded, already rising. "The fair line. She's there, undercover." Without another word, they abandoned their half-eaten meals, coats slung over their shoulders as they strode toward the exit. The urgency in William's stride matched the steel in Melissa's call. They knew their CEO didn't summon them lightly. Back in the lobby, the tension coiled tighter. Linda, the night manager, stood behind the desk, her red lipstick stark against her pale face, clipboard clutched like a shield. She leaned forward, her voice sharp with false courtesy. Why would a CEO book a suite without announcing themselves? The question wasn't curiosity. It was accusation, dripping with the assumption that Melissa's presence, her black skin and casual clothes, couldn't align with such authority. Melissa met her gaze, unflinching. "To see how you treat strangers," she said, her voice a calm blade slicing through the room's pretense. "To see what this hotel really is when no one's watching." The words landed like a challenge, exposing the rot beneath the velvet chairs and brass railings. Dylan, the young clerk, let out a soft scoff, his gelled hair catching the light as he shook his head, convinced she was spinning a lie. His smirk was a silent verdict. She didn't belong, not in Suite 1701, not in their world of curated luxury. Near the side counter, Loretta, the older black housekeeper, moved with deliberate slowness, her hands arranging cleaning supplies to mask her attention. She glanced at Pamela, the young white intern who stood half hidden by a velvet partition, her phone still clutched tightly. The device held a video, Dylan's sneer, Linda's condescension, frozen in pixels. Loretta's dark eyes, weathered by years of silent endurance, fixed on Pamela. "What are you going to do with that video, child?" she asked, her voice low but piercing, like a needle through fabric. Pamela's fingers tightened around the phone, her knuckles pale. "If I send it, I could lose my internship," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the desk where Linda stood. The fear was real. Her future in this industry hung by a thread, and exposing the truth could snap it. Loretta's gaze softened but didn't waver. "You can find another job," she said, her tone sharp with wisdom. "But you can't find another conscience." The words struck Pamela like a gust of cold air, rooting her in place, the weight of her choice pressing against her chest. She didn't delete the video, but her hand trembled, caught between courage and caution. Across the lobby, Harold, the older white guest, stood quietly, his beige coat folded over one arm. His sharp eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses, traced the scene with a weary familiarity. He'd been here before, years ago, dismissed by staff who saw his modest appearance and assumed he was less. Now, watching Melissa stand her ground, he saw a mirror of his own silenced pain. His gaze carried a quiet weight, as if to say this moment was not new, only louder. He didn't speak, but his presence was a testament to the countless times this script had played out, unwitnessed, unaddressed. Linda pressed on, undeterred by Melissa's response. "We have protocols," she said, her voice rising slightly, as if volume could mask her bias. "Corporate bookings require verification. You can't just walk in and expect special treatment." The words were a deflection, rooted not in policy, but in the unspoken belief that someone like Melissa, black, unadorned by the trappings of wealth, couldn't hold the power she claimed. Dylan nodded faintly, his arms crossed, emboldened by Linda's lead. Tom, the security guard, remained a silent sentinel, his hand still near his belt, his posture a wordless threat. The lobby's elegance felt suffocated now, the jazz a faint murmur beneath the growing storm. Melissa stood at the center, her calm a fortress against their doubt. Linda's question about her booking wasn't about procedure. It was a challenge to her legitimacy, a reflection of the same prejudice that had welcomed a white couple with smiles while dismissing her with suspicion. Dylan's scoff wasn't just disbelief. It was a dismissal of her worth, based on stereotypes that had no place in her hotel. Harold's silent watch, Loretta's whispered wisdom, and Pamela's trembling resolve framed the moment, each a thread in a tapestry of quiet rebellion. Melissa's call had set something in motion, and as the minutes ticked by, the lobby waited, unaware that the truth was about to walk through its doors. The lobby of the Fairline Hotel held its breath, waiting for the truth to walk through its doors. Melissa Nkosi stood resolute, her gray hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to the opulence around her, her calm a fortress against the storm of prejudice she'd faced. The staff's assumptions, Dylan's scoff, Linda's condescension, Tom's looming presence, had built a fragile house of cards, and the spark Melissa had ignited with her call was about to topple it. The glass doors swung open, and William Langston and Julian Barrett entered, their presence a thunderclap in the gilded silence. William, broad-shouldered in a navy overcoat, carried a leather folder, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Julian, lean and precise in a dark suit, moved with the quiet authority of someone who knew the weight of truth. The air shifted, the jazz fading to a murmur as every head turned. Dylan's smirk vanished, his hands freezing on the counter. Linda's clipboard trembled slightly, her red lipstick stark against her paling face. Tom, the security guard, straightened, his hand dropping from his belt, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. William stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. Melissa Nkosi is the CEO of Rowan Hospitality Group and owns 51% of the Fairline. The words landed like a gavel, shattering the staff's illusions. Dylan's eyes widened, a flush creeping up his neck. Linda's lips parted, but no sound came. Melissa stood unmoved, her gaze fixed on them, her silence louder than any accusation. Julian moved to the front desk, his tablet glowing as he connected it to the lobby's overhead screen. With a tap, security footage flickered to life, casting a stark light on the truth. The grainy video replayed the scene. Dylan shaking his head, dismissing Melissa's reservation. Linda's clipped refusal, her smile a thin mask. Tom advancing, his posture aggressive, treating her like an intruder. The footage was a mirror, reflecting their actions in unforgiving clarity. The lobby, once a stage for curated elegance, now felt like a courtroom, the staff on trial before their own biases. Loretta, the older black housekeeper, stepped forward from the shadows of the side counter, her uniform spotless but her hands rough from years of unseen labor. Her voice, steady despite the weight of the moment, cut through the silence. "I've seen this before," she said, her eyes locking on Linda. "I've watched you dismiss guests and staff, turn them away because they didn't fit your idea of who belongs here." Her words were not an outburst, but a reckoning, naming the pattern Linda had woven, judging worth by appearance, by skin, by assumptions that had no place in this hotel. Melissa turned to Linda, her voice low and unshaken, a blade honed by years of resilience. "I didn't ask for privilege," she said. "I asked to be treated like a human being." The simplicity of the statement struck like a bell, its truth reverberating through the room. Linda's face drained of color, her clipboard slipping in her grip, her authority crumbling under the weight of her own actions. Dylan looked away, his earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of shame. Tom shifted, his ex-cop stance softening as if realizing he'd misread the scene entirely. William's voice broke the silence, firm and final. "Linda, you're on indefinite suspension pending a full review." He turned to Dylan. "You're on probation and will undergo mandatory retraining on bias and professionalism." His gaze shifted to Tom. "You're reassigned from the front lobby, effective immediately." The pronouncements were swift, each word a nail in the coffin of their complacency. Linda's breath hitched, but she said nothing, her eyes darting to the floor. Dylan's hands shook as he gripped the counter. Tom nodded once, his jaw tight, accepting the verdict without protest. Pamela, the young white intern, stood near the velvet partition, her phone clutched tightly, her hands trembling. The video she'd recorded, Dylan's snare, Linda's dismissal, burned in her palm, a truth she could no longer ignore. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have something else," she said, holding out her phone to Julian. Her eyes flicked to Melissa, seeking permission or perhaps forgiveness for her hesitation. Julian took the device, his expression unreadable, but the weight of her decision hung in the air. A small act of courage in a moment that demanded it. The lobby's elegance felt hollow now, its chandeliers casting light on a scene of exposed truths. Linda's earlier insinuations, that Melissa couldn't be a CEO because of her casual clothes and black skin, were not just mistakes, but deliberate judgments rooted in stereotypes that favored a white couple over her. Dylan's dismissal of her reservation wasn't carelessness. It was bias, assuming she couldn't belong in their world of luxury. Tom's aggressive stance wasn't protocol, it was prejudice, seeing her as a threat rather than a guest. Loretta's testimony, Pamela's video, and Melissa's unwavering presence had stripped away their masks, revealing the ugliness beneath. The consequences were set, but the reckoning was just beginning, and the lobby braced for what would come next. The lobby of the Fairline Hotel braced for what would come next, its polished surfaces reflecting a truth now laid bare. Melissa Nkosi, her resolve a quiet fire, had stripped away the staff's masks, exposing their biases through security footage and a young intern's trembling courage. The consequences, suspension, probation, reassignment, hung heavy, but the reckoning was far from over. Melissa turned from the stunned faces of Linda, Dylan, and Tom, her steps measured as she moved toward the elevator. The night wasn't done with her yet. It demanded a private reckoning, one that only solitude could hold. In Suite 1701, the door closed with a soft click, sealing Melissa in a world of curated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Charleston's sleepy skyline, velvet armchairs arranged with precision, a faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. She dropped her bag on a chair, the gray hoodie still zipped to her chest, and sat at the desk. The laptop's cold glow lit her face as she opened a blank document, her fingers hovering before they began to type. "Dear Mama," she wrote, the words a bridge to the mother she'd lost, a woman whose tired feet and unyielding voice had taught her to build doors when none were opened. "Tonight, I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I stood still, letting them see their own mistakes. But that silence cut me too, Mama." Her words spilled out, raw and unfiltered, tracing the exhaustion of being judged by her skin and clothes, despite her title as CEO. "It's tiring, carrying composure like armor, proving I belong in rooms I own." She paused, her eyes stinging. But no tears fell. Her mother had taught her that tears were ammunition for others. She saved the document, unsent, a quiet reminder of the strength and cost of her resolve. Morning broke over Charleston, its light pale and unyielding through the suite's windows. Melissa, now in black slacks and a white blouse, her curls pulled into a low twist, descended to the staff conference room. The lobby below was quieter, the usual bustle muted, as if the hotel itself sensed the shift. Guests moved with distracted glances, unaware of the storm that had passed. Behind the desk, Dylan stood pale, his eyes avoiding hers. Linda was absent, her suspension a shadow over the counter. Loretta rolled her cleaning cart with steady purpose, her nod to Melissa a silent salute. The conference room, tucked behind the office wing, was a stark contrast to the lobby's elegance. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a projector humming softly. William stood at the front, arms crossed, his presence a steady anchor. Julian adjusted the projector, his movements precise. Pamela sat in the back, her phone face down, her hands clasped tightly. The staff filed in, uniforms crisp but faces drawn, some curious, others wary. Melissa took her place at the center, her voice clear and sharp. "Last night, you saw what happens when bias overrides respect," she began. William clicked the remote, and the security footage played again, a damning loop of Dylan's dismissal, Linda's refusal, Tom's aggression. Pamela, trembling, stood and handed her phone to Julian. "I recorded it too," she said softly, her video adding another layer of truth. Dylan's sneer, Linda's clipped tone captured from the shadows. Loretta cleared her throat, her voice steady. "I've worked here since the doors opened," she said. "I've seen guests turned away because they didn't look right. Too dark, too plain. Not enough like the brochure." Her words, heavy with history, pointed to a pattern of exclusion, of judging worth by skin rather than character. Melissa nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. "I don't need you to bow your head," she said, her voice a blade honed by years of resilience. "I need you to lift it high enough to see people with respect. Your biases are the biggest risk this company can't insure." William stepped forward. "Loretta, your actions last night showed dignity. You're commended." He turned to Pamela. "You've been offered a permanent role working with my office on guest experience audits, if you accept." Pamela nodded, stunned, a quiet steel forming in her eyes. The room was silent, the weight of accountability pressing down. Melissa moved to the door, pausing to pin a single sheet of ivory paper to the bulletin board outside. Inked in bold, centered text. "Don't just train staff to serve guests. Teach them to treat people as human." She stepped back, her eyes lingering on the words, a directive to outlast the moment. In the lobby, Pamela read the note silently, her fingers brushing the paper. Loretta, pushing her cart, smiled faintly, her pride unspoken but clear. Harold, standing near the elevators, held his granddaughter's hand, a new intern, her service badge gleaming. He gave Melissa a nod, his eyes carrying the weight of recognition, of a shared fight against invisibility. Melissa walked toward the cafe, her steps firm in the morning light, the city waking around her. The hotel's elegance remained, but its soul had shifted, marked by a truth that would not fade. Thank you for joining us in this powerful journey through the Fairline Hotel, where Melissa Nkosi's stand against prejudice reshaped a legacy. Her story challenges us to confront our own biases and champion respect in every interaction. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How did this tale resonate with you? What moments struck a chord? Drop a comment below and share where you're tuning in from. Your voice matters. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more narratives that provoke, inspire, and demand change. Your support fuels these stories, and we're grateful for every moment you spend with us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep listening, and let's meet again in the next tale that dares to speak truth. Thank you, and see you soon.